70s now, and the stars are Dustin Hoffman, Woody Allen, Al Pacino. Those guys weigh no more than 150 pounds, and you weigh 250. So that doesn't work. And your name, Schwarzen, Schnitzel, or whatever it is, that doesn't work either.
Austrian-born Schwarzenegger is the son of a Nazi party member who served in the German army in World War II. He believes it's important to let people know that the next generation can change.
What is important right now is, because there's all this chat out there and all this stuff on internet, all this negativity and hatred, that we have to speak out and confront that. The more we speak out about that issue, the better it is. So every day we have to talk about that, we have to talk about it, we have to talk about it over and over again. Because we cannot let them get away with those lies and with this hatred. We got to talk to them and talk them down and let them know that the only way to go is to go through life with love and not with hatred.
Authorities in civil
exactly transpired prior to Mr. Kessler falling backward isn't crystal clear right now.
The suspect was identified, willingly remained at the scene, and was interviewed by deputies.
The suspect further stated that he was one of the reporting parties who called 911 requesting medical attention for Mr. Kessler.
Multiple witnesses at the scene were interviewed. However, there were conflicting statements about the altercation and who the aggressor was. Some witnesses were pro-Palestine, while others were pro-Israel. Sheriff Freihoff said Kessler remained conscious while being transported to Los Robles Regional Medical Center on November 5th.
Mr. Kessler's condition continued to deteriorate, and death was pronounced on November 6th at 1:10 a.m.
Dr. Young says an autopsy found non-lethal injuries to the left side Kessler's face. Internal injuries include skull fractures and brain swelling, which typically result from a fall.
The cause of death has been certified as blunt force head trauma. The manner of death is homicide.
Detectives obtained a search warrant for the suspect and his residence Monday. He was released at 6:15 p.m. after the search finished. As of Tuesday afternoon, there had been no arrests in the case. Authorities are asking anyone who witnessed or has knowledge of the incident to contact Detective Stump at 805-384-4745. Anonymous tips can be sent to Crime Stoppers at 800-222-8477. Christina Corona, NTD News, Los Angeles.
Hamas's attack on Israeli border communities. This came as Israeli troops dismantled terrorist targets in Gaza City. A Jewish man died from head injuries following an altercation at dueling pro-Israeli and pro-Palestinian rallies in California. Police identified the suspect in the case but have made no arrest yet. Expert on the rights of Jewish people. What are the forces behind the rise in anti-Semitism, and what can people do about it? Joining us now is Gerard Felitti, Senior Counsel at the Lawfare Project. His organization provides legal services to protect the civil and human rights of the Jewish people worldwide. Gerard Felitti, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
To begin, we're seeing a rise in anti-Semitism. A 69-year-old Jewish man was just killed in California. Now, you're a human rights attorney. How likely are we to see justice in this situation, and what would that justice be?
Well, I think we're watching this situation very carefully to make sure that justice is carried out. What that would look like is then arrest and prosecution for hate crimes. This is a murder that was motivated by anti-Semitism, so we expect there to be a murder charge with an enhanced penalty for it being a hate crime. And what we expect is speedy justice. We don't want to see delays or procrastinations or equivocations. We expect the Sheriff's Department to work with the prosecutor's office to get that conviction quickly.
And now, a report is saying that anti-Semitism has gone up 330% globally compared to last year. What's behind this?
What's behind it is massive support for what Hamas has done in Israel. We've seen pro-Palestinian and pro-Hamas demonstrations around the world that are literally inciting and calling for violence. We've seen hundreds of thousands of people, different places in the world mobilizing, and this creates an atmosphere that's hostile and dangerous for the Jewish community. So we're seeing anti-Semitism, we're seeing violence, and we're seeing all sorts of events that should not be taking place.
And to your point, we saw massive protests even reaching the White House just over the weekend. Given the horrors that we saw in the Holocaust, why aren't we seeing pro-Israel protests?
Well, we are seeing pro-Israel protests, but the difference is that the Jewish community in the United States and elsewhere is, quite frankly, scared. They're seeing these pro-Palestinian demonstrators. As we started talking about, a Jewish man was murdered in California, apparently by a pro-Palestinian protester. So there are very strong concerns for safety. What we're not seeing is we're not seeing the government crack down on these pro-Hamas demonstrations. We're not seeing police take a more direct approach. We're not seeing arrests. We're not seeing the National Guard step in to protect the Jewish minority population, as we did see them come in during BLM protests and also during the civil rights movement to protect African Americans. We're not seeing government action.
And on that note, how much of that do you see bleeding into the political scene, given that today's election day and next year is the presidential election?
Inevitably, there is some bleeding in on politics, but fighting anti-Semitism is bipartisan. We can't allow it to become political. This is such an important issue. Whenever we're talking about racism and bigotry, we need to have unity and not make it about politics. So we're appreciative of everyone in elected office who's paying attention to this issue and doing what they can to stop the anti-Semitism that we're seeing.
And on that note, you brought up how the Jewish community is feeling scared. What can people do to push back against this?
What people can do is what they're already doing. On college campuses, they're calling for administrators to act, to disband student groups that are aggressively anti-Jewish. They can file lawsuits when their civil rights are violated. That's what the Lawfare Project does. They can seek support from elected officials to enhance legislation that provides for hate crime penalties. But more importantly, we need to push for a change in narrative. The Jewish community is a minority community entitled to civil rights protections, and we can't allow ourselves to forget that and allow civil rights to be trampled on.
And how does that start? Is that in our education system or broadly? What is the root of this?
Jew hatred is systemic, so we do need to go back to school. We need to go back to the education system. We need to teach about minority rights. We need to teach how Jews are a minority, the world's oldest and most persecuted minority. We need to teach that it's not just the Holocaust. We have modern forms of anti-Semitism. If you start in the classroom, you can perhaps unlearn the hate that's being taught and live in a more civilized society.
A lot at stake here. Well, Gerard Filitti, thank you so much for your time.
No, thank
doesn't need to escalate.
He said that the war is like good versus evil, and the U.S. stands with the good.
Funding protection for religious groups. Senate leader Chuck Schumer wants Congress to allocate over $1 billion to that cause. He says bigotry has reached a boiling point. Schumer says intolerance against Jewish organizations has been on the rise since the October 7th attacks by Hamas. He told the New York Post, the thing that religious leaders, particularly our Jewish religious leaders, have clamored for is more money for the nonprofit security grant program. He said the program has been very successful, but the money has more or less run out. The grant allocated $300 million for the fiscal year, which ended in September. Schumer wants to bring the number up to $1.2 billion. That's after an increase in attacks against Jewish Americans. Just over the weekend, an anti-Israel protester painted the White House fence red while demanding a ceasefire in Gaza. Protesters also tried to climb over the fence. Up next, an investigation is underway after alleged writings of the Tennessee school shooter were published online. Find out more about how parents and Nashville authorities are reacting.
And a dive boat captain found guilty of neglecting his duty. More on the seaman's slaughter conviction years after his dive boat caught fire and sank. In just a moment here on NTD News Today.
At least 4% in 2 national polls and get donations from a minimum of 70,000 people. North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum didn't qualify for this debate, and former Vice President Mike Pence recently suspended his campaign. The RNC has raised the requirements for the next debate, which may narrow the field even more. Right after the debate, tune in to catch NTD's news analysis from 10 to 11 p.m. Eastern Time. I'll be there covering the debate in depth with special guests and reporters. We'll also be hearing from voters. You can catch it on TV, or you can also watch at ntd.com and on Epic TV. We hope you'll join us. House Judiciary Chair Jim Jordan says to censor speech online. Jordan says the House panel report released yesterday is a bombshell. NTD's Jeremy Sandberg tells us why.
An interim staff report titled The Weaponization of Disinformation, Pseudo-Experts and Bureaucrats, How the Federal Government Partnered with Universities to Censor Americans' Free Speech, was released by the House Judiciary Committee on Monday. Jordan called out the Department of Homeland Security, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, the State Department, and academics at Stanford University. He says hundreds of secret reports uncovered a joint censorship effort with big tech before the 2020 presidential election, and that communications showed true information, jokes, and opinions were targeted. Jordan says a partnership was set up called the Election Integrity Partnership, or EIP, and shared an email from an EIP member stating it was created at the request of DHS and CISA. The report calls it a consortium of disinformation and says pressure was largely directed one way. Republicans and conservatives were largely being flagged with misinformation, while false information from Democrats and liberals went largely untouched. The report called it a pseudoscience being used to frequently target communities and individuals with opposing views of current narratives. Some of the posts flagged were from then-President Trump, North Carolina Senator Tom Tillis, Representatives Thomas Massie and Marjorie Taylor Greene, Fox News host Sean Hannity, and satirical media site The Babylon Bee, along with posts from other media organizations and everyday Americans. The report says the federal government's effort was to censor Americans engaged in core political speech leading up to the 2020 election, under CISA's Countering Foreign Influence Task Force. CISA Executive Director Brandon Wales told Fox News the agency does not and has never censored speech or facilitated censorship. Jeremy Sandberg, NTD News.